talk about the book a little bit, and then I'll get into reading some of the stories. So I'm really glad that two people in the back can make it tonight, my grandparents, who are from Herman, Minnesota. It's a great factual town of Minnesota, of course, that we all heard of. So, but these stories really take their heart and soul from my grandparents and the time that I spent there on their farms, both on my mom's side and on my dad's side. And the main thing I want to do with this collection was to allow readers to connect with the stories in some way. So as you're listening to the stories, I hope you remember your own childhood, spending time with your parents, or for some of you, maybe even your grandparents. And just, you know, as you're listening to the stories, go ahead and let your mind drift and think about some of those things too. All right, so as many of you probably know, who grew up on farms, especially back in the day a little bit more, not only was there a strong connection to the land that was very rewarding, but also one that could be very, very dangerous, right? And so this is one of those stories. So this one is a little bit different turn from the last one, but I'll bring it back up after the story. So, also, this is a piece called flash fiction, so it's trying to convey a story within 2 pages or less. So this is called The Sound of Watermlon. He walked into the kitchen and saw her at the sink rinsing vegetables. He said, "I thought I saw Hank Halverson pull up into the yard today." "That's who it was," she said. He shuffled to the head chair at the table and pulled it back. "No, sir," she said, and stopped him. "Not till you wash those hands. Better get your face and back your neck too, Pop. Then you can sit. Ain't no reason for you to be dirtier than the children." He smiled and stood next to her. He waited his turn to put his hands under the cool running water. "So what was Hank doing over here?" he asked. Thought he had plenty of planting to do himself. He splashed water on his face and dried it with a towel. "Well, I better tell you," she said, "before the children come down, so as I can get through some of the details they don't need to hear." He looked at her with concern. She met his eyes. "It's all right," she said, "but you best be sitting down for the news." She turned off the water and wiped her hands on her apron. Peterson's had an accident today. He leaned back in the chair and folded his hands. His brow tightened. David had loaded up the kids on the Oliver, she said, so as to go pick rocks in the field. She shook her head and walked over to the table. Matthew, she said, the middle boy, who was riding on one of the tire fenders on one side with his brother, and Elizabeth and Maggie were on the other side. She pulled a chair out and sat down. She placed her hands gently on the tablecloth. Maggie's not but 12 years yet, you know, so Elizabeth was holding on to her, just to be sure. Well, Matthew had caught a frog and stuffed it in his pocket. She stopped again and looked out the window. She continued after a few seconds. He put it on Elizabeth's head so as to scare her. It worked. She screamed and let go of Maggie to knock the critter off. Her eyes glazed. David turns around to see what's going on, she said, and all he sees is Maggie's hair. He reached for her hand. She squeezed and went on. That's what he told Hank anyway, she said, and by the time he stopped, it was too late. She had fallen right in front of the tire. My Lord, he shook his head. That ain't the worst of it, she said. It gone right over everything from her chest on up. She pulled her hand away and wiped her brow. She looked out the window. You know what Hank said, the oldest boy told him? He shook his head. He said the boy told him he knew what had happened right off, even though he didn't see it. Said he knew what happened because of the sound. Said it sounded like someone had dropped a watermelon off a barn roof. I don't know what exactly that sounds like, and I don't know how that boy thought of it in such a way, but I'd be lying if I sat here and said I ain't been imagining what it sounded like ever since Hank came out and told me that. She looked at him now. I can tell you one thing though, I ain't never want to hear such a thing in all my life. Ain't a least bit curious, not after what happened to that little girl. She stood and walked back over to the sink. I told Hank that we take the Petersons morning milking while the family makes arrangements and whatnot. He stared out the window, and he imagined a watermelon falling through the air.